Yeah. So welcome, Andy. Welcome,
Thank you,
Josh, to the Tiki, a place that I know you've been before, but not in quite some time. When we opened this place in 2000, the very first guests in here for the first sort of party that we threw once we finished the renovations was the Tragically Hip.
Nice.
And you spoke about sparking one up, and Gord did. And he shared it with our friend Stuart Jolliffe from Delta Hotels, who I did not know was like an insane Tragically Hip fan.
Nice.
So, as mature a man as he was, I really had no idea the anxiety he was feeling and that kind of shit. So I think he drank a few cocktails to work up the courage, and then came in, met Gord, and they were similar height, so they hit it off immediately. Then Gord sparked up a reefer, and shortly thereafter, Stu walked outside and puked.
No.
But I'm happy to say there's only been one other puking experience in this building in 23 years, so it's nice to have you back here.
Well,
nice of you to be guinea pigs for whatever the fuck it is we're trying to do with this thing.
It's great to be here.
Yeah. So I just, the idea here is to have a conversation about whatever we want to talk about.
Absolutely.
There'll be a couple of things that I'll start off with because I don't research fucking anything. And I've known you guys long enough, but there's still things I don't know because I don't do that much reading about the band. But I'm interested as to how you two in particular, well, maybe we can start with musical careers and where those started. Like, what were you doing? What were you doing? If you can remember that far back.
Let me see. It's funny because a friend of mine, Dave Perlmutter, lives here in town. And
Dave.
Yeah, do you know Dave?
Dave's on my board of the Halifax Urban Folk Festival.
Well,
he's my lawyer.
Well, there you go. So Dave and I went to not only elementary school together, but high school together.
Wow.
And every year and Josh and I went to high school together. And
which high school is that?
North Toronto Collegiate. And Jim Cuddy and Greg Keeler also went to North Toronto. And there's an annual show called Maytime Melodies, which is, all the bands and orchestras and choirs play and sing, and it's a big thing. And towards the end of high school, Dave and I started singing together, and we performed at Maytime Melodies. So that was really my first time on stage in front of an audience, and we did a Hall & Oates song.
Wow.
Not the one that everyone's sick of with the Maple Leaf Skulls scoring song. So that was kind of, and we did that, grade 12, grade 13, still at that time. And then went off to McMaster. I remember auditioning for a couple of bands. I was working in a factory making mufflers for like $6 an hour. And I remember...
Huge money.
Bending pipe.
Yeah, bending pipe. Spot welding. And I remember going through the Toronto Star and looking for musicians wanted. I don't know what I was... I was lost. I was, 19, 20 years old. I'd gone to Western for 3 months and drank my way out of there. And so I didn't know what to do. And so I thought, what would I like to do? I'd like to sing. And, I was listening at that time, the Clash had come along. Some Girls came along, that I love that album by the Stones. And so the first audition I went to, as I'm going in, there's a guy coming out with Robert Plant's hair and his own microphone. And I'm thinking, fuck. I mean, this is 1979.
Right.
And the first thing they asked me is, do you know Highway Star by Deep Purple?
Deep Purple.
It's like, no, I don't. And I think I sang a little bit of Aqualung or something like that.
Wow.
Because my brother had Aqualung, the album.
Of course.
You listen to your brother's albums. Older brothers.
You brought your flute.
Yeah. No kidding. Yeah, I know. I know a little bit of Tull. So, and then I went to another one that was some university guys it was a basement on Markham Street. Mm-hmm. And, before I went, because I was so nervous, I did a shot of something from my parents' liquor cabinet. And I remember, so I thought, I'm just going to give it, And I remember them saying at the end of it, they said, we like your energy. And so nothing happened after that. I went back to school, to McMaster, started playing in a band with some engineers there. We played 1 or 2 shows. We opened for, what was Ian Thomas's group called? Anyway, we went through different names, which I won't trouble you with. And then I was at a pub one night. There were Thursday night pubs at Mac with live music, and there was a band playing, a trio, and they were playing music that I could really get into, like the Jams version of Heat Wave and stuff like that. And I really liked them. And I went up to them after the gig, and I said, I really like you guys, but you need a singer. And that's me. And they said, oh, yeah, whatever. And so I went and I hired a rehearsal space. And I auditioned for them. I brought them in. I paid for everything. And that was the beginning of Directive 17, which lasted, I guess that was about, 1981 or so. And we lasted till about 85.
Yeah, I remember the name.
I think the first gig we did in Toronto, I think we opened for, it was either Ramblers or L'Étranger at Larry's Hideaway.
Right.
It was May 31st, 1982. I remember that because it was Tammy's birthday,
right.
My girlfriend at the time. And we had a pretty good run, but it just it was that early 80s. We loved, the Jam, Psychedelic Furs, U2, a lot of over singing on my part. It was just the heroic stuff. And then I heard REM, and it was like that was the beginning of the end of the band for me. It was like, that's really what I'd like to do, something more like that, where there's more singing going on, and it's rootsier, and so I left Directive 17, and Josh was just coming out of a band that he was in, and we had known each other since 1970. We grew up in the same neighborhood, and we just started playing together with just an acoustic guitar and 2 voices, traditional songs, Hank Williams songs, so that we could go anywhere and play for anyone at any time. That was our
theory. And what was your route to this particular moment in time?
So we grew up together. Andy and I have 2 older brothers. My brother Neil and Andy were the same age and played hockey together, and that was my memory of Andy initially. And we went to the same high school. I was a few years behind them. But I don't think when Andy was in school, or my brother, there weren't as many bands.
No.
But when I was there,
Disco.
it was
We
right
danced.
as the sort of the punk, it was, late 70s,
Yeah, 77,
80, so a lot of people started playing bands, started bands. And although I didn't initially really join any bands, everyone in my family played music. So my older brother was a classical guitar player, and my brother Neil played piano up until early high school, classical piano. And so I think I didn't realize this until much later, but I just thought if they can play, any idiot can do it, then so I had this sort of this idea in my head that I'll play guitar, and I started playing guitar, and I took some lessons, and I really wanted to learn how to finger pick because amongst many records in the house were Chet Atkins records, and I loved the way he could make the guitar sound like an orchestra, and so I found a teacher that taught me how to do that. He had infinite patience, Marty Posen, and and I really was learning more traditional music like that. Not really saying that much, but also learning like Hank Williams songs and all this stuff that floated around in that world. And then towards the end of high school, there was a guy that I didn't know that well, but he had played in a band through high school, and that band broke up, and he wanted to start another band, and he asked me to play in the band, but he wanted me to play bass, and I thought, okay, well, I'll check it out. And so that band formed the last year of high school, and I'm not really sure what the reason was, but the plan was to go to England after the next fall, instead of no one was going to go to university. I mean, I didn't even finish high school, so that wasn't really a problem. So. So in the fall of, it was 82, we moved to London, England, and and through that summer we did shows, and I think in the fall we also did a gig at the concert hall. So the whole high school would come to our shows, so we actually made a fair chunk of money, enough to buy tickets over to London. And so we moved to London and rented a flat for 3 months, and sort of looked around for places to play, and ended up in Brixton. And we squatted in Brixton. We found a venue in Brixton, the Frontline Theatre, and we lived there for 2 years. And that was, sort of I consider it my university education, really, life education.
What was the band called?
The Ramblers.
The Ramblers.
There was a high school band that moved to England, and we did play in Toronto, and we played at Larry's Hideaway. We played at.
You played in Hamilton at Tilly's place.
Tilly's, yeah. Tilly's is
strippers by day, rock bands by night.
And the Turning Point was another venue to play, and then of course the concert hall was, we had like 500 or however many, 300 kids that would come to the concert.
The Turning Point would serve anyone over the age of 12.
Yeah. I mean,
no questions asked.
I had been playing in other bands prior to this high school band. Like I had sat in playing guitar and again, all these guys were older than I was. And one of the places, the first place I played was the Turning Point. I was 15, and I remember my parents came to that show, and with another guy that I think that was in the band, and I was my mom talking about, remember the stubby bottles.
Right.
The wait staff came with her fingers inside the bottles,
putting
them on the table
so they could carry
more.
Yeah.
And
she was like, "Oh my."
Just added to the flavor of the export.
And so anyway, 2 years in London. I mean, there's sort of lots of stories about that as well, which I'm happy to talk about. But at the end of that 2 years, it sort of run its course, and so I moved back to Toronto. I missed playing, I missed playing guitar, and not that I couldn't play guitar there, but I just didn't totally, at that point, the music scene in London was sort of the new romantic
stuff.
Right,
I was about to say.
And I just didn't really identify with that so much, and so moved back to Toronto, and I didn't know him, but I had heard a lot of my friends came out to visit and stay with us in the squat that we were in. And someone had told me, this guy, Wayne Stokes, works at a music shop in Toronto, and he's putting together his own home studio, which in that day was unheard of, like it was not like what you have there, Jordy. It was and so he had a reel-to-reel, I think it was a 16-track
I think so.
reel-to-reel machine. And
Coal-fired.
Yeah, coal-fired, definitely, yeah. And so I just thought, well, I'd like to move back to Toronto. I'll meet this guy Wayne, and long story short, about 6 months after I got home, we rented a house together and started building. It was just a bungalow just around Bathurst.
On Hillmount.
Bathurst, south of Lawrence, north of Eglinton.
Yeah.
And we built a studio, which we, my memory of it is that we smoked my first hydroponic marijuana, and there was more navel gazing and and trying to find the tape measure than actually building of studios. But we sort of something got cobbled together, and at that point that was just when Andy had left Directive 17, and we had known each other for a long time,
and our bands had done shows
and
together.
we had done shows together for sure. So, and I mean, Wayne Stokes, who was the original drummer in the Skydiggers, he had very ambitious ideas. He had the studio idea. He wanted to start a record label. He wanted to, it was all very, it was all great, but I mean, it certainly wasn't my trying to put a band together and play music was sort of ambitious enough. And he, although, and this is no criticism of him, but it was he was working full time, and there was that part of it never really materialized. So as he was trying to do that, Andy and I started playing, and we just started going out and doing shows.
Well, we did a bunch of stuff with Wayne.
Oh, that's true. We did. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Recorded some stuff, and it was.
Yeah. But he, I guess, in fairness to him, he had sort of a bigger vision of what he wanted to do. And
he was never able to really finish anything. There was always this kind of, what he heard in his head was not what we were.
And it was, and he needed ultimately, to start, like anyone like that, you need someone that can make the trains run on time, and that was not his. That was not his forte. He had a lot of energy, and he was a hard worker. But just anyway, so we kind of drifted away and started doing. Just started playing places, a few open mics, and then Andy at that point was also singing with Andrew Cash,
right?
And and Andrew was in the process of signing a record deal with Island Records, and he was doing a residency at the Spadina Hotel, which we would come and do a few songs. Andy was singing with him at the time, and we would come up and do 2 or 3 songs every month. It was a Monday night.
Yeah, and Jason Collette. And Kirsty and Catherine Rose.
Catherine Rose, yeah.
Were Lazy Grace, and they would play a couple songs as well.
So that's really how the band evolved. We had this. Andrew went to make his first record, and we ended up kind of adopting that Monday night,
the regular residency.
And, it was, and then we, Peter Cash, Andrew's brother, used to do the door at the Spadina Hotel. The $2 or the $5 that cover charge, whatever it was. It's like 70, 80 people that could fit in that room.
If that,
It was like an old,
I remember
drinking.
Yeah.
And so we, and one day after we were playing, Pete handed Andy a tape of songs that he had written, and
actually, it was, he never approached us directly, which is Peter, which is very Peter.
Who?
It was Andrew.
Oh, it was Andrew.
Andrew said,
I thought
I've got this tape of songs
Pete's.
that Pete's done.
Okay.
And so I listened to them with Andrew and Sandy.
Oh, okay.
And
I didn't realize
I had no idea what to expect. No idea. And it was like, it sounded just like Pete. But I had no idea that I'd known him for several years because I loved L'Étranger and would go to all their gigs around the city for years. And Pete was always there, and with Mike Angus, Charlie's younger brother. And they were kind of the roadie guys. And I had no idea that Pete played guitar or wrote songs or sang. And when I heard this tape, it sounded just like him. And it was like, okay. if he's into it.
So we asked him to come join us, and he did. And he was he's extremely shy, and but also had written these songs. I mean, he's definitely an introvert, and he's not really like Andrew is a lot more extroverted. But it was a great intro, because it was very very casual, small room. No, there's very little pressure in terms of the expectations were not very high, and we started playing with him, and then we put we answered an ad.
We saw an ad in Musicians and Now Magazine, and it said, just learning to play bass or starting whatever, but loves Hank Williams and stuff. And so I'm afraid of the telephone, so I had Josh call the number. and then this fella came down to check us out on a Monday evening, and it was Ron
Macy. Yeah,
he came down with his girlfriend, and he had the greatest sideburns I've ever seen. And I remember saying to Josh afterwards, I don't give a shit if he can play the bass. He just, he had a great quiff, and
I want those burns.
He just looked so fantastic. It's like, it doesn't matter if he can play; he just looks great.
So we did some playing with him, and then he joined us there, and then eventually we got Wayne, who was a drummer. That was sort of his, that was his instrument, and and we played there we did kind of 2 stints at the Spadina Hotel,
87 and 88,
in 6 months and 8 months or something, a full, and at the end of that time we were offered a record deal from Enigma Records.
You had the name by then?
Yeah, Andrew Cash actually named us when he was looking, after he did his record with Island, he was looking for names, and he said, he ended up going with the Ambassadors, I think, Andrew Cash and the Ambassadors, but Skydiggers was one of the names.
He discarded or he wasn't using.
Yeah, and he said, and we thought, wow, that's a good name, and can we use it?
Who doesn't take the Sky?
Yeah,
really.
Well, it's also easier if somebody outside the group names it, because if you end up hating it, then no one takes it personally.
Yeah.
Whereas Ronnie wanted to go with Crowded Trousers, I think.
Crowded Trousers.
Oh, my God.
That one may not have endured.
Wouldn't have made it past
19. So that was the thing. We loved what we were doing. When the 5 of us got together, we were rehearsing in the apartment that I was living in with my girlfriend on Bathurst Street, just north of Bloor, and we would rehearse with acoustic guitars. Ron had a very small bass amp. Wayne would play a suitcase for a kick drum, and he had a tea towel over the snare and played with brushes, and so there are no microphones, and that's how we started as a vocal group, basically, with kind of minimal accompaniment.
So the REM reference was also, it was that, but obviously it was like the Beatles. We grew up listening to the Beatles, the Byrds, the Hollies, those vocal groups were very much those were reference points, all of them. And so, at that point, 4 of us sang in any different, different configurations.
We tried to get Ronnie to sing.
Yeah, but he wouldn't sing. But he had his sideburns to take care of. That was a full-time gig, I think. So yeah, really at the end of that time, that tenure at the Spadina Hotel, we had been offered a record deal. We had started playing some other venues as well, and building up
the Cabana Room was a big
Cabana, and then and then eventually the Horseshoe and other venues. But it was just at that time in Toronto, as you know, there was a lot of great venues. There's a lot, lots of bands were, and of course, Much Music became a vehicle for bands like ourselves, Cowboy Junkies, Blue Rodeo, Mary Margaret O'Hara. I mean,
Bare Naked Ladies.
Like the list goes
Yeah.
on. You're obviously well versed in all that, but that became like national radio was in the 50s, 60s. Like it got us into bars, it got us into living rooms and everywhere.
For the first time, there was something where kids in, wherever they were in the country were seeing and hearing the same thing at the same time. I mean, it was huge.
Which is something that we've bemoan at this point because there is no unifying factor.
No, everything's...
Not the way Munch did. When I first moved to Toronto, I can't even remember now, it was like probably late 78 or early 79, and I was working at A&A Records on Yonge Street, Canada's largest record store at the time. And the Alma Combo was in its absolute heyday. I think, near the end of its heyday anyway. So I was probably at the Alma 5 nights a week, 6 nights a week, on the guest list, never paid for a drink, ever, because it was all on the record company tab.
Amazing.
And working just around the corner from Larry's, of course, and The Edge.
Yeah.
Which I knew everybody at The Edge. I'd actually finished work on a Saturday night at A&A's. This is when bars closed at 1. So get everything done, finish, get the shit locked up in the safe and the cash reports done because I was supervising the place. And then run like hell down to Gerard, past the lineup because...
You're on the guest list.
Past the lineup.
Mr. Big Time.
I would run into the bar and then hang a left. And then Annie Bradley, who was in Dick Duck and the Dorks, sort of the house band for The Edge, would be standing at the bar with her hand out with a Heineken in it, like a cold Heineken in it, because my timing was just like, Campbell be here in seconds, and the beer's already open, and there it is.
Perfect.
I mean, those are different. I mean, places closing at 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
That was a shock because I just moved from Ottawa, where if you really wanted to drink after 1, you just go to the hall till 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Speaking of places that would serve anybody who was old enough to walk in.
Yeah.
But the time, like I do remember walking into the scene in Toronto in those days and going, holy shit, there's a shit ton of venues and there's lots of really good bands playing. And at the time, I think I worked at A&H for a year and a bit, and then I got a job at Attic, and Attic, signed Teenage Head, and they signed Johnny and the G-Rays, which is still, to this day, one of my favorite bands that just never got their shit together to do what they should have done.
Right.
And bad luck and everything else with both those bands.
Yeah.
But we signed a lot of Canadian acts out of there, and we were in the attic of the building in 98 Queen East, and True North was the floor below us, so Bernie was around, and all those folks were around. And I was just the shipper. So I got hired there to be the shipper at, Attic Records. And as Tom Williams told me when he was interviewing me, it's like, look, we don't want anybody with ambition here. What we really need is a shipper. We need a guy who can ship. And I'm like, I'll ship like nobody's business, man. I've been working in record stores for years. I manage my own record stores. I can handle a hand cart. I can clean toilets. I can make coffee. I can keep track of a warehouse, promos. I can do all of those things. And of course, I was ambitious as hell. So that lasted for about a year. I wound up writing a letter called A Year in Shipping by Mike Campbell, an unsolicited report, and turned it into Al Mayer and Tom Williams. And Tom was laughing so hard in the other room, they fucking promoted me, basically, because the company was growing at the time. But I started all kinds of things, started sending out newsletters to university stations along with promos, which nobody was doing.
Right.
Nobody was paying any attention to university at the time. even though CKCU in Ottawa was probably the only real radio station. I mean, real college radio station,
Right.
you know what I mean? And I actually did stuff while I was there, so I was showing some initiative in the place, and they finally put me in charge of production. But I would be out in Toronto every night of the week. You know, I'd be at the Domino Club, or I'd be at Larry's chasing cockroaches around or whatever, and going to see the Sharks and some of the other bands at the time that were making big waves in Toronto. The Sharks, you know, should have happened, didn't happen. You know, there was a lot of that.
Was Basil in the Sharks?
Yep, Basil was in the
Cleve.
Sharks.
And Cleve, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And, what's her name?
Guitar player.
Oh, Josh, fuck. It'll come to me.
Sherry Keane in that band?
Yeah, she sure was.
Sherry, she's out here
Baxter.
now, I think.
David Baxter.
Yeah, Dave Baxter.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And when there'd be boat cruises and stuff that we'd go out on at Mama Kia and a lot of things, but it felt like there was so much happening. And that lasted and the punk thing was still a big deal. So it's interesting you went to England. Dave Marsh from Joel Plaskett's Emergency Band did the same kind of thing that you did. Like, he left Halifax, fucked off to London because the punk thing was happening and that was in his blood. Started a band called No Damn Fears or something, which he still claims is like right up there with the best of the British bands. And they got coverage in the British trades and Melody Maker and all that kind of thing. And then eventually he wound up coming back because things got more and more difficult. And as you say, the music scene was morphing into something completely different at that point. And it wasn't so much what he was interested in. But he still says, as you did, that was an experience that truly shaped him into the human being he's become at this point. Well, better known as a grumpy drummer now, but who can write great songs, but just can't get his shit together to organize gigs or anything else. His whole take on the industry is, well, I created the songs, I recorded the songs, my job is done. Right. At this point, it's up to somebody else to, release the record and distribute the record and put something out and organize gigs. But I can't draw fleas, so there's no agent involved in me, and no one who's sane will manage me, except his brother. But obviously, you need to go from point A to point B to get anywhere. So, when did you run into the people to put all those things together for you?
Very early on with, for me playing, and I toured with Andrew for about a year in 1988 on his first album, and I learned so much doing that. It was a real education for me because I'd never toured before, so it really got to see how bookings were done.
So were you completely self-contained at that point, self-managed?
No. Andrew was signed to Island, and Skinny Ten was his manager, who was more rock and roll than anyone in the band.
That's true.
He was always up for fun.
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace, Skinny. And so then when Andrew's tour finished, we started skydigging again, and we were playing shows fairly regularly at the Cabana Room. And Mark Smith came to see us, Mark Cattle Prod Productions, and he was working for Enigma Records, who had an office in Canada, a 3-person office
in Mississauga.
In Mississauga, Derek Ross, for a identical triplet, and
triplets.
and former drummer of the Spoons, and Mark Smith and Debbie Pock, and the three of them, they had a distribution deal with Capital EMI,
right?
And they were given the green light from California. Enigma was based in Culver City. They were given the green light to sign a Canadian act, and Mark came out to see us, brought Derek to the Cabana Room, and they made us an offer. We found it appealing that we were part of it was that we would get a guaranteed U.S. release.
Right. Big part of it.
And it was it just
and
it
I
made
think
sense.
I think part of why Derek worked radio for Enigma, so he heard "I Will Give You Everything" and said, "I think I can get that
on the radio." Yeah,
that was really on the strength of that song that he signed us. I think ultimately.
It is.
And when we recorded it, Andy was just telling the story the other day that he didn't really have much to do with the recording. I mean, he was involved in some of it, but he was not very hands-on. But with that song, he wanted us to speed up. He wanted to remix it, speed it up a bit, and add a chorus on the end. And at the time, I think we all felt like, what the fuck, like that.
Yeah.
But he was totally right.
Don't touch our stuff.
And we did it. To our credit, we did it, and it between the radio play that he got and the Much Music play that we received on that song, we did a video with Roy Pike, a really cool 35 millimeter black and white, kind of classic, timeless.
Which cost $1 million.
It cost as much as the record did.
Cost as much as the record.
We spent 30 grand on the record, which we did in 10 days. Mixed it and
in those days.
But the video in those days, videos were expensive, and we and Roy did it, and again that song that
it paid off.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point earlier, it's just like that's where the work begins too, right? So you're out, then you have to go out and tour and connect with audiences, and we did that. We for the first really 3 years we were constantly playing. I mean, and initially it was sort of perceived as a what happened was Enigma in Culver City went out of business. They, it doesn't even matter why. I think they ended up selling but
David Cassidy.
But what happened was Derek partnered up with Terry Flood, who had been involved with what was the label that he was involved with, and Donald.
He was with Donald Tarleton.
Yeah. And anyway, he was involved in, I think, managing April Wine as well.
Yeah.
But they became partners and started FRE Records, which we did our second and third record on. But they never really had the funding that they needed to. So we kind of bounced around between Enigma and FRE until we made a record with Warner, our fourth record with Pete, and it would be easy to say that we were, fucked around or whatever. We had bad luck, but ultimately, I think we had pretty good luck in the grand scheme of things. Things could have been different, but we were allowed to do pretty much what we wanted. We were allowed to make records and evolve and develop as a band.
I mean, when we 91, winter of 91, I Will Give You Everything's been all over the radio and
Much
video.
music.
We go on tour opening for Blue Rodeo for 6 weeks across the country. There are no records in the stores.
Because they'd gone out of business.
The
timing.
They'd run out of money.
The timing sucked.
The timing sucked.
But it also created this weird other kind of demand, or especially as a live act. That was also very fortuitous. We opened for Blue Rodeo. It was a great double bill. They were a little older than us in high school, so Andy knew them because of his brothers. But we got along great with them. We had a lot of fun touring, and it was a great double bill.
And another great education.
Well,
that's another nice thing about that particular band is the opportunity to open for them, which is always going to be sold out. Doesn't matter what you're doing. So they could pick anybody. Didn't make any difference. They didn't need anybody to sell tickets for them. But they took Plaskett along with them, and they took Thrush Hermit along with them, and they took all kinds of bands along with them that otherwise would never have been heard.
Yeah.
But that also ties, again, going back to 1984 when Much Music started. I participated in the documentary, the 299 Queen Street West, which is going to be playing Toronto at Roy Thompson Hall on September 22nd, I think. So
Nice. As
pretty
part
ambitious.
of TIFF?
No, I don't think it's part of TIFF.
TIFF's right around then, isn't it, usually?
I think it's earlier.
Okay.
But the director, Sean Menard, is like, he's 35. He didn't know shit about much music or the early days, but there was something that intrigued him about it. So he busted his ass for years, financed the whole thing on his own. And we wound up seeing Jordy and I wound up seeing the world premiere at the South by Southwest Film Festival this past March. And Rick Campanelli flew down on his own dime, Rick the Temp, to be there and stuff. But watching it really brings you right back to that particular point in time when we'd moved into the new building, so it wasn't just the old fly by the seat of your pants shit. It was a building that was purpose-built for television. But trying to explain to people that, or as I was explaining in the documentary, it was like the effect was almost immediate. You know, for the first couple of years, we were a pay service, so you still had to pay for it. But there weren't as many subs as we'd like, but it still made a huge impact for the people that bought into it. And then when it went to basic cable, it basically exploded. If you had a video out, nobody would have heard you the week before. And the next week, you can tour the country and fucking sell out.
Yeah.
Decent-sized clubs. You can make a living.
Yeah.
And that lasted for such a long time. And it's such an important part of important part for life of a Canadian touring band.
Totally.
You know?
And identity, you know, it really created a voice and an identity for Canadian music culture, you know, like there's no question. It was
well, there really was no longer the lag. Like you could have things that were popular in say, the southwestern Ontario, like the Blue Peters of the world,
right?
That nobody out west or on the East Coast really knew about because they just played in southwestern Ontario. But suddenly, or you'd have somebody on the West Coast who might go down, like the DOAs, who might actually work
Southern route,
California, down. And so now there was no lag anymore. Everybody was getting the same information at the same time.
Yeah.
And you know, shows like yours and you know, Terry David Mulligan were bringing to light all of these different regions of the country and what was going on in Winnipeg and what was going on in Edmonton and what was going on in Halifax and, you know, St. John's. And so suddenly it was there. It all kind of synchronized rather than being that little scene or that little scene. And it was...
The other beautiful thing about the station that I mentioned in the documentary was back in those days, in the early days, the nascent days, nobody much gave a rat's ass what was happening with radio or retail or anything else.
Right.
You know, if somebody made a good video, we're playing it. So we used to force radio to play stuff.
Right.
And we abdicated that sometime in the late 90s, which is, to this day, I think one of the biggest mistakes that the station ever made. But we also were very instrumental in setting up Video Fact that people could, you know, apply to as long as you had your MAPL of ducks in a row for who's going to do it and where it's going to be shot and all the rest of it. You know, we could contribute. I forget what the cap was, but it was a substantial amount. It was like $25,000 or something. And if you had to shoot everything on film in those days, which everybody did, because video, would look like shit, they'd kick-started everything. When I first started Much East down here, there were a handful of videos I could play, and it was like the Rankin Family, Rita McNeil. It was all trad stuff, you know. It wasn't until I had to actually literally knock on doors and try and find people who could produce films. And NASCAD, thank God for them, you know, their film department and stuff, although it was like a lot of Super 8 and pretty scrappy stuff. But as long as the song was good, you can get away with almost all kinds of things.
Right.
And then when I first moved out here, just before Much East, the pop explosion had started, and we started to get huge amount of bands come in, and lots of people traveling from across the world to see the shit, and enough venues in the city, like at least 8 or 9, that you could put bands into. And you guys played pretty much everything in Halifax, as far as I mean, I remember shooting.
We did. Although we were saying, I don't think we ever played the Double Deuce.
I think the Double Deuce was a little early. I was only in the Double Deuce once.
Right.
Or twice, maybe. The first time I saw the Tragically Hip play in Halifax, I'd seen them 100 times, of course, but in Halifax was in the...
Misty Moon?
No, it was like the early 80s or mid 80s, because I was already working in Much, and they played where the Carleton is right now.
Roses.
The bar next door to it, which is called Lot 6. They used to be one big bar, and it used to be called Rose's Cantina.
Okay.
And it was a cabaret. It was open until 3:30 in the morning. And they played there.
Right.
Which was a huge, like, rabbit warren of a place, but there was a place where they had a stage to play. But I can remember going to see you guys and talking to you at Mount St. Vincent University,
Yeah.
Vinny's,
Yeah.
or the Birdland, or,
Yeah.
all of these different places.
Flamingo was another place I remember playing.
Yeah, Flamingo early on. Yeah.
That would have been the first.
mid-
They did, and was it Greg Clark that
Yep.
started the Double Deuce, and did he also did Birdland, right? That was
Yep,
him.
he did. He did the Double Deuce. He did Flamingo. He did Birdland. He did another place called Waldo's. He was involved, I think, in the Cafe au Lait as well. Jesus. Sloan, when they played here recently, just did a big stop before introing a song and did a big Greg Clark summation of how this city would be nothing if he hadn't started shit. And Greg has just recovered from his second stroke, and it was like his first day out of the hospital. He was down by the soundboard on his little walker. But Chris had them all because he had, I suppose he threw the Marquee Club at Hal in there as well.
Right.
But the last place I remember him having was a place called Plant 9, which was his 9th bar. Like he just refused to give up. Not the best with money, not the best with everything else, but certainly a great eye for talent. And if something deserved a stage, he would put them on the stage. Even if it was at the Marquee Club, we probably lost money. And there were many, many times when I was doing Much East where I was just dead tired. It's just like, you know what? I have to go down to the Marquee just to be a body in the room, because I knew no one was going to buy tickets for Art Bergman, for instance, even though his whole band was the Sons of Freedom, for Christ's sakes.
Right.
It's just like Chris Cobain is on record, I think, with one of our new music people is saying that without the Sons of Freedom, there probably wouldn't be a Nirvana, because I used to come up from Seattle to see that band all the time.
Right.
Still hugely underrated. We have millions of them still that are way too underrated. But
That was
Ron's,
Tom Harrison. And
everybody in the band was
and
named
Betty.
Tom except one guy, the singer.
That's their brother was in that band, right?
Yeah.
Tom Harrison's brother. Tom Harrison took me to see the band before they'd ever played a gig.
Yeah.
I was in town with J.D. Roberts before I was doing the TV stuff. I was just doing press and publicity tours for the VJs at the time.
Jeez, it's so funny seeing him on TV now.
No kidding. Massive amount of press for free, like the front page of every entertainment section, full color pictures, like 2-3 pages on Much, for nothing.
Yeah.
Just for showing up in town
Right.
and doing the interview. So while we were in Vancouver, even when I was just a cable rep, Tom had his own little Cable 10 show or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So every time I was in town for Much, I used to be on Tom's show talking about what was going on.
Good guy.
What's going on
guy.
in Toronto?
He'll
What's
be-
going on?
He'll be missed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I miss him terribly. And I loved his band.
Yeah.
Bruno Cerisi's
His
Medallion,
Medallion.
his cover
Yeah.
of Ian Hunter's I Wish It Was Your Mother's on half my playlists. But there was so much stuff going on, but I'd always check with Tom, and he goes, well, there's this new band. I haven't played a gig yet, but my brother Tom plays guitar in it. He's really good. And I was like, oh, yeah, sure, your brother plays guitar, whatever. And he goes, what are you doing tonight? And looked at JD. We didn't really have anything. We probably would have gone to a pub and played darts at the Railway Club or something.
Right.
And instead, we went to somebody's basement, which was all padded out and everything. There's fucking amps down there. There's the whole 9 yards. So saw Sons of Freedom perform for 45 minutes before they'd ever played an actual gig. I was completely blown away. Wound up booking them for a Canada Day gig I was responsible for in '87 or something like that, I think. killer band. Just didn't, hard to translate. And now it's even harder. Like, we don't have much music anymore. We don't have a cohesive radio landscape. People aren't even listening to it anymore.
Yeah.
How are you navigating that as a bunch? And how are you using the technology? Is any of it make any sense to you anymore?
We every couple of years we pledge that we will be more active on social media, and we that lasts for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then it just kind of falls off because we want to make music.
Yeah.
And you can spend, it's a full-time gig just trying to make up interesting stuff for the internet.
Stuff.
Yeah, I mean it's insatiable, right? It's voracious in its hunger for more information, and so we try, but we haven't. I can't say we've embraced it. Would you say?
No. I mean, I know, I've been more reluctant than Andy in a lot of ways, to my detriment in a lot of ways. But I always feel like you have to have a good idea to get behind it. It
Right.
can't just be pointless, aimless content. So
Here's a photo of my dinner.
Yeah. Here, I mean,
Who fucking
we have
cares?
a new recording coming out. So we're trying something. What impact it will have or not, we'll see. But at least it's something we feel it's worth pursuing, and worth doing. But in the end, I mean, I also think for us, because we've been doing it for a long time, we do have an audience, and our audience will come, and they do come see us, and it's hard to know how social media is reaching those people in terms of getting to know,
Especially
the
when we're
shows.
not on it.
Yeah, but I mean, even the promoters, the people that are plugged into their venue and their audience, that, I mean, they must, something's happening, and I don't know how they're hearing about it necessarily, but people.
Well, you have a newsletter that you
Well, in
send
our
out,
case,
right?
it's I started the newsletter not long after we started the club,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the goal at that point was to get 300 subscribers, which is
Right.
what we're aiming for. And now I think we're more like 6,000.
Right.
Right.
And they're from all over Hell's Half Acre.
Right.
My biggest responder to my emails, to my newsletter, is Pat Stewart
From the odds. drummer.
from the Odds
Yeah.
and Brian Adams. He's
Yeah.
texting me from the Adams tour in Europe, going, "Oh, I like that one. Oh, that was good." Oh. And then when I booked Jesse Roper, who's from Vancouver Island, Pat made a point that I actually used in the write-up. I amended the website to go, well, here's a guy you ought to fucking know, currently on tour with Brian Adams. Here's what he has to say about Jesse Roper. It's like, no, real deal. Don't even think twice about it. And he played our place in November, and we sold it out, which is unheard of for a West Coast artist, somebody from the island. And he just played last Friday night, a week ago, and we sold it out with standing room to like 107 people or something. And at the time, it was the last date of their tour. So they toured coast to coast, and we were going to be the last date. So he had one of his buddies take the entire opening band, the Bank Brothers, who were also really good and really young, took them outside for some reason. I don't know if they're going to smoke or do some fucking thing before the gig. So Jesse took the opportunity to get up on stage and say to the entire audience, which is packed, look, it's the last date of the tour. We're going to fuck with the opening act. So what we'd like you to do, they're really good. Like, you're going to want to cheer, you're going to want to clap, you're going to want to do all that stuff. Don't do shit.
Oh.
I want to hear crickets. Not for one song, but for 2 songs. Do you think you can help me out?
It's like the baseball home run. Ignore in the dugout.
Just
Ignore the guy in the
whatever.
dugout. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I was getting there. The band was halfway through their first song, and our door person just stopped me, and she took me aside and said, "Look, doesn't matter how good you think the band is, you got to zip it for 2 songs. This is the first song, so after the next song, so after the third song, you can go nuts." And it pulled it off. Like, one guy walked in between the first and second songs, and when they finished the second song, there was one guy clapping,
which is perfect, which is even better.
Good.
Yeah,
just as good.
Yeah.
And when they played their third song, oh no, they started some little kind of like little song and dance thing on the stage because it was clearly freaking them out. And one of Jesse's guys came. Oh, they're going into this little country hoedown riff because they don't know what to do, and they're completely freaking out. And then they started into the next song, and when they finished, the place went nuts, like went crazy. And they finally figured out that they'd been fucked over.
Right. That's pretty
good
funny.
gag.
That's a good gag.
Yeah. Do you guys ever do gags? Did gags in those days?
Well,
do you remember having shit pulled on you as an
I'm
opening act?
I'm sure there were times, but I don't know. I don't.
Nothing sticks out. Nothing
nothing quite that
nothing.
nefarious.
That's,
That's a pretty good. That's a pretty
that's
good
Olympian, I'd
Didn't
say.
you put Andrew up to run for government or something?
one. Yeah, that was a good gag, eh? Yeah.
Charlie Angus too.
That's right. That's right. We're responsible for that. I don't remember anything specific. I mean, when Dan Hitchin was working with us,
it's more of a crew thing.
It's
too,
almost
sometimes.
more
Yeah,
of a
yeah,
crew
that's
thing.
true.
Yeah.
They
That's
were,
true.
I mean, yeah, that's nothing. There are definitely gags and things, but nothing that good. That
It usually happens at the end of the show.
Yeah,
Well, there was.
Yeah.
There
Like, I've
was.
seen enough big shows where all of a sudden, potatoes start falling out of the sky onto the opening act at the
Well,
end of the show and shit
The
like
one I
that.
can think of, and I'm not sure that it was. We worked with this fellow doing lights for 2 shows, and he was quite a character, and I can't even remember his name. Not that it's important, but we did a show at a place in Oshawa called the Purple Onion.
Oh,
And I remember, getting up to sing to start the set, and I looked down, and there was a double-sided dildo at the base of my music stand.
Guy, what's his name?
Nice.
And I didn't get it, but that was his idea of a gag. But we only worked a couple of gigs together. Yeah, the press the ejection button. I'm not sure whether he thought it was funny or it is now.
I thought the gag had the ball in it.
No.
Oh, that was his gag?
That was his gag.
I
Yeah.
didn't want to see that.
I've only been to the Purple Onion once, and I think it was a gig that must have been booked like way, way, way in advance. And it was Tom Cochran on New Year's Eve, and when I was doing the Mike and Mike show, our schedules just happened to line up around the prairies, so we went out to the Edmonton and Calgary shows because they were kind of on our itinerary. And then Tom was like, change your itinerary. You got to come to Winnipeg. It's going to be a good show. And so we basically hung out with them for a week just as Life is a Highway was taking off.
Right.
Like it was just, you could feel it. And you could listen to the radio every day and hear
Yeah, it was there.
constantly.
Yeah.
And he was moving up and up and up and up and up. And this is in the fall. And then he got a hold of me and he said, we're playing the Purple Onion on New Year's Eve in Oshawa. You want to come out? And we thought, Rhodes and I had just gotten married at the time. I was like, fuck yeah, it's New Year's Eve. Why don't we, book a room at the Ambassador Motor Inn or whatever the fuck, and we'll go to the show. So I wound up going to the show and getting hauled up on stage to sing backup vocals with Peter Fredette. For fuck's sakes, best singer there is. Yeah. And I think I ate some hash. And I had a good night. I had a great night. But I never really went to Oshawa much, put it that way. It's kind of just drive by that joint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know? Did you guys play sports
Growing up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Hockey. Andy was
Captain of the football team,
Get the fuck out of town. What did you play?
defensive back. Yeah, where you rarely had to hit anybody head on.
Nobody passed in those days.
Not a lot of great arms.
No.
No, we had a couple of good football teams. It was
I played football. I was a quarterback.
yeah,
Yeah.
nice.
But
Cuddy was a quarterback.
it was coming on that figures.
Yeah.
Of course, Cuddy was a fucking quarterback.
Did you ever play Kipling?
School?
Yeah.
No,
Is that where you're from?
Well, my brother played for Kipling. And
Okay.
no. We
Mississauga. You guys just played in town. didn't you?
we just played city teams like Danforth Tech and Central Tech and Lawrence Park and Northern. Those, and then when you get to the playoffs, maybe it was only about 6 teams that we played. Yeah.
Word an hour, boys. What do you think?
I'm happy.
You happy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got good shit there. We'll pull it apart.
Yeah.
All right.
It won't be a linear thing.
That's cool.
Anyway,
It was enjoyable.
that was fun.
Is while I have you, is there some song or some artist that you think, in the spirit of Squirrel FM, hits from an alternative universe, that you can think of a song that should have been a fucking humongous hit, and for some godforsaken reason just wasn't? Not talking about your song specifically,
yeah.
but just the tune that's like... I was just reading it. Chuck Prophet was just writing a bit about the documentary that's going to happen with about Peter Case
Oh, okay.
from the Plimsolls.
The Plimsolls.
And
Yeah.
A Million Miles Away.
Yeah.
And it was like, that
Yeah.
should have been fucking...
I think I saw them. I think I saw them in Hamilton when I was at school. In
I don't think
Hamilton.
I ever got a chance to see the band live.
He played. Did he? He played with REM a bit too, didn't he? Was it
I
Peter
think he's
Case?
friends with all of those people. I don't know if he ever
Because
played
there
with
was
them.
who's the guy? Because at one point they had an extra guitarist who often played acoustic guitar when they
You
started
probably
tour.
go
I
back
thought,
and look at it. I'm going to have to rent the movie, I think.
yeah,
Like his...
A
he was
million-
trying to start a band with Phil Seymour from Dwight Twilley's band.
right.
But he wanted to call it Phil was ready to do it, but wanted to call it Phil Seymour's Plimsolls.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that's not happening. But he was hanging around at Shelter with Petty and all those other
I think
people.
the song that I can think of that the record label tried the most times to make it a hit was the Smiths' "How Soon Is Now." It kept coming back, and they were sure that it was going to break the U.S. for them, and
Just
it never did.
Never did.
Have you
I,
got?
I have a song just because,
Awesome.
I made a record with Dennis Ellsworth.
Oh, Jesus
And
Christ. Speaking
and
of
there's
awesome songwriters.
it just in the spirit of what you're saying, and the song of his, I love most of his songs, but there's a song called Rudderless Day.
Yeah.
This record's called Hazy Sunshine, and I love that song. I think it's a great record. That's a great recording. That's my
And a beautiful, beautiful human.
yeah.
He's a good guy.
I met him when he was in a band called the Rude Mechanicals, because of course Shakespearean fucking Dennis, of course. Why would you name a band the Rude Mechanicals? That's fucking ridiculous. And they were opening for The Pursuit of Happiness at the University of Prince Edward Island back when the barn was still the
Yeah,
he
played
we
there.
played
fucking
there.
place.
Yeah.
Jesus. And Dennis and I have been friends ever since. So I get him to Huff whenever I can. I'll book whatever iteration of his band whenever I can. I can't get people to come out to see him. Just fucking draws flies.
One of the times we were
Get him to
here,
do this song for what?
Well, we'll play
Yeah,
it.
that's-
Obviously,
no,
we'll
he
play it.
he played a
Tour
few
together.
songs before us at the Carleton. One of the
Yeah,
years we
for
were
sure.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember which tour, but
No,
yeah.
but
We're in touch all the time.
yeah. Well, I
I'm,
hope we'll see him on Sunday
We
night.
won't. He's
Oh, is
he's
he?
out of town. I was
He's out of
texting
town?
with him.
Oh, okay.
He's in Toronto actually.
But he seems to be pretty happy.
Yeah, no,
He
I
seems to
know
be
he has
happy about where his
two kids,
songwriting's
and
going, and he's
yeah,
getting placements,
and he's
a bunch
yeah,
of things.
yeah. No, I think it's all good. He seems great.
I know the dad thing was scaring the shit out of him before it happened.
Yeah,
And it's like,
but I think he's embraced it.
oh,
now,
he's
and it's
100% gone in that direction.
yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I just, as you said it, I mean, he's got lots of great songs. Andy and I wrote a tune with him on that
I totally remember the fact that he played before you because that was the connection. Because he said, then I met Josh. Then I talked to Josh. We got along. And then we talked about him doing a record with me. And then I went to Kingston to do the record with Bath.
Right.
Hip
That's
studio.
right.
And that's
right.
where I met everybody there.
You know, and now as you're saying this as well, you know, I played with Gord Downey on all his solo records, and the last Secret Path show we did was here in Halifax.
Yeah.
And Dennis came to that, and afterwards there's a little party, and I remember he was there, and Gord was there, and he came up to me, and at that point Gord's memory was pretty. You know, he couldn't remember people's names and stuff like that, but he came up and he had met because Dennis, on the record we did, he took a poem from the book of poetry that Gord had done and released with Coke Machine Glow, and he turned it into a song and asked for Gord's permission. He got me to ask him, and Gord loved it, and he went over just to say, he came over and said, remind me of Dennis's name, and he went over and he said, hey Dennis, thanks, good to see you. Gave him a hug, and that was he split. We left. That was the last show Gord did.